Shira, I understand you're Canadian, right?
I
So
am.
it must be a bit of a fresh experience to be an adversary of the United States, but here we are.
Oh, actually, I need to do a funny video on that. Like when you suddenly realize you're in America, but you're Canadian, and like you have this, I have like identity crisis.
Well, it's funny, there's this stream of jokes about how Canadians are really nice. Finally, we've learned how you piss off a Canadian. Maybe it's a good segue to talk a little bit about a couple of the new Trump policies and to try to not just make it purely political, to talk about some of the second order effects, impact on tech and on startups. So, the first of these is, of course, the tariffs threatened and imposed on Mexico, Canada, China, and with the more threatened on countries like Denmark and the entire European Union, and goodness knows who else. So, I don't think tariffs will have much of a first order effect on tech, but I think the sort of the chain of causality here, and then I'd be interested in your thoughts in terms of how this might impact startups, is tariffs lead to higher prices, no matter what Donald Trump says, right? It is effectively it's a tax on imports, and that flows through to the consumer. Higher prices drive higher inflation. Higher inflation means that interest rates will not be cut, or maybe could even go up again, right? So it leads to higher interest rates. Now, higher interest rates, in terms of their effect on both public and private markets, tends to depress valuations and reduce appetite for risk. And so, we've come off a long period of relatively high inflation, relatively high interest rates, a somewhat of a chill, I think, in the funding markets for startups. And I don't know, I mean, Amir, you're an investor. It's felt like the last 6 months have been an accelerating thaw in terms of funding going to startups. And I'm wondering, does the sort of uncertainty about, these policies cause people to be a bit more cautious on their investments?
I don't think so. I'm not seeing that. I think that there's renewed excitement about startups and AI. I'm seeing valuation going up. I'm seeing LPs willing to put money in. I think as long as you track the Fortune 500 and it's going up and to the right, then everything is happy in startup land and VC land. And if it started going down and people are like worried about their assets, then they start like divesting of risk. I think that Trump and the rest of the leadership, global leadership, is going to try to make the big companies go up and to the right. I actually see a different problem with the tariffs and the relationship with China. If I can steal another 2 minutes, as a startup, a lot of things are coming from China that I'm now worried I won't be able to collaborate with China anymore. And the example that I've talked to with a lot of entrepreneurs is around robotics. It seems like robotics is the next big wave. It seems like there's a lot of innovation coming from China around types of robots, operating system for robots, and a lot of hardware coming from China. If I'm a US startup trying to build some innovation for robots, I'm going to have a supply chain problem. I would want to move my startup to Canada or to Europe in order to avoid regulation. So I think that in certain areas, the tariffs with China are going to hurt innovation where it's actually about to happen. And I think robotics is the next wave. And I think there's going to be a lot of startups coming from Europe and not from the US because of these problems.
One of our predictions on the podcast that Chris and I made earlier in the year for 2025 is that it's going to be a bit of the year of robotics. So I definitely agree. Like, a lot of things are coming together on both the hardware and software sides. And it's a great observation that we live in a globalized world now. So tariffs don't just increase prices, they slow innovation on these things.
I loved Amir's optimism in terms of the flow of money right now, because I find there's a lot of startups that I know that are trying to raise, and I will introduce you to some of them that are finding that there's still a bit of that narrative of uncertainty. Like, I guess I have the external perspective from when you see the media and I guess all of this other response, all these regulations, not to get into politics, but that get announced and they get pulled and get announced. Like, it puts so much in chaos and flux. And I wonder how that's going to impact the market when you feel like you don't have a sense, even though there was maybe inflation ahead or, oh, is there a recession? There was at least a sense of like, we see the strategy and it's going to lead to either one way or the other way. And at least there was a sense of a bit more control over that. Whereas right now, I just feel like there was a lot of optimism with Trump getting into office, obviously, and flow and crypto and all that. There was like, and the Wall Street and stocks and all that. And now I feel like the past 2 weeks, it's like, oh my God, this is like, this could really, I wonder if it could impact the market and the feeling of like, we don't know where anything's going. So we're just going to keep things tight.
I agree. I don't get it. Like, Amir, you were saying there's this feeling that the government will keep, things going up and to the right. And certainly the market seemed to reflect that sentiment. And yet, when you see things like trade wars being started, it's like the math's not mathing, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a good understanding about what tariffs do to economies, and people are just rushing it right off, right? Markets are at all-time highs. It's similar to what happened, with DeepSeek and all of these AI stocks. So it's like, I don't know, the markets seem crazy optimistic at the moment, and I just can't figure it out. I mean, one thing that, I've advised one or two companies that I've invested in that are raising is to maybe raise a little more than they were planning to, because I feel like, yes, right now it still seems like things are open, but I'm really nervous about like all the possibilities for chaos and the volatility and what that might do in the next 3 to 6 months.
Raising more, a little bit more, is always a good advice. And I totally agree with Shira. As an American, I feel like every morning I wake up to an episode of The Hangover, the movie. Like, what happened? Oh my God.
Dude, where's my country?
Why do I have a tattoo of Mexico on my hand or something like that? Like crazy shit that is happening all the time. And I agree that there's a lot of volatility. But at the end of the day, I think the market are irrationally optimistic consistently. If you look at it, it's like we've been through a lot of things and they consistently performing, and the companies backing them are consistently performing what their profit calls. So like it is irrational to look at something that is happening consistently and say that we don't understand it. That's we might need to find another way to explain that.
That makes sense. And let's see. There's that saying, was that the markets can stay irrational for longer than you can stay solvent. So never bet against the markets. But there's also the saying, what goes up must come down, right? So at some point, that optimism might end, and it will be interesting to see what happens then.